Hi, I'm Adrian Halverstadt, and I welcome you to my YouTube channel, The Justice Center at Dr. Halvey. In this playlist, which I've called Foundational Principles of a Republic, we are examining various aspects pertaining to a republic form of governance. We're also noting specifically the governance structure that King David initiated for the nation of Israel in the Old Testament. Also, we are drawing down connecting points between King David's approach with the constitutional republic form of governance that we use in the United States today and the structure that is used in the U.S. criminal justice system. So why are we looking at King David? Well, 2 Samuel chapter 8 verse 15 tells us that David reigned over all of Israel and administered justice and equality to all of his people. Those are two important aspects, outcomes that we look at when we are seeking to judge or measure the effectiveness of leadership and or a system of governance. And the Bible chooses to showcase David in this light as one who led with equity and fairness to all. In the first video, we described King David's republic, what it looked like, how he set up his governance. And we examine the important aspect of impartiality when it comes to having a just and equitable system of governance. In the second video, the focus was on the need for accessibility and or representation. This is an important aspect for having a healthy governing system, particularly in that of a republic. We must have accessibility to leaders and representation of the people. The aspect that we will examine in this third video is the need for a governmental structure that restores justice. King David sought to make things right, to right the wrongs, if you will, for the people who had been harmed for any number of reasons. People are hurt due to their own behavior. They mess up. They do things wrong. It hurts them. People are hurt due to the behavior of others. You know, there are bad people in the world that do bad things to people. We also have good people in the world, but in the way in which they live their life at times or even love us and our families, it brings hurt our way. And so people hurt for different reasons. And consequently, there's just hurt that comes because we're people and we live in a fallen world. And the focus is not on so much the source of the hurt, but the fact that people are hurt. That must be the primary emphasis that we look to when we're talking about restoring justice in our world today. Bad things happen to good people. Regardless, hurt is hurt, and people need restoration and wholeness. Restorative justice speaks to righting the wrongs of injustice. Restorative justice is an approach to addressing harm caused by criminal offenses or conflicts or just situations that bring pain to people's way, and focuses on healing and repairing the harm inflicted on those victims, the community, or even the offenders themselves. The main gist of restorative justice is to shift the traditional criminal justice paradigm from a punitive model that's centered on punishment and retribution to one that emphasizes accountability, healing, and restoring relationships. You know, a restorative mindset quickly moves away from, well, they deserve the hurt because of what they did or did not do, to they're hurting, action is needed. Restorative justice seeks to bring together those affected by a crime or conflict, including victims, offenders, and community members, in the context of a safe and structured dialogue that's facilitated by a trained mediator. That's how we often see restorative justice working within the criminal justice system. That's how it also works in communities when tragedy occurs. People come together and they discuss the hurt and what needs to be done to repair that hurt, and if there's ways that that hurt can be avoided in the future. Restorative justice requires collaboration and people coming together. Through the process of restorative justice, individuals are given an opportunity to share their experiences, express their feelings, and discuss the impact of whatever has occurred in their lives that's brought on the pain. The key to restorative justice is bringing people together. Reparation and restoration is found only through community engagement. One notable example of King David's restorative work is found in 2 Samuel chapter 9. Here we find King David showing concern and making reparation for the descendants of the former king, King Saul. Saul was the first king of Israel, and he was not kind to David. He was jealous of David, the Bible said, because David was more popular than him, particularly after he slew Goliath, the giant. The people looked to David and celebrated his actions and kind of diminished the position of Saul at that time. And so there were numerous occasions where Saul tried to have David killed. The Bible also infers that Saul's leadership did not end well, and his family became marginalized and shamed due to Saul's actions. Yet, David treated Saul's descendants with kindness and granted them lands and privileges, ensuring that their welfare would be addressed and they would be included among God's people or in society at that time. You know, in a republic that's governed by the higher law of God, all lives matter. All lives matter, regardless of who did what and what did who in terms of causing harm or pain. There are some key principles underlying restorative justice. These would include, first of all, focusing on the harm. Rather than solely concentrating on rule breaking and legal violations or on who done who wrong, restorative justice recognizes that people in relationships are hurt, and it prioritizes addressing and repairing this hurt and harm. David could have justified getting a pound of flesh from Saul's descendants because of what Saul did to him, but rather David honored God's higher law and sought repair and restoration. Other key principles of restorative justice would be inclusion and participation, reintegration and reparation. Restorative justice involves all stakeholders affected by an offense, including the victims or the offenders, if that's applicable, and community members. It recognizes their agency and provides them with an opportunity to actively participate in the resolution process, the restoration process. David demonstrated inclusion and participation, compassion and generosity towards King Saul's grandson. King Saul had a grandson who was the son of Jonathan, King Saul's son, and his name was Mephibosheth. And David demonstrated inclusion and participation, compassion and generosity by welcoming Saul's grandson into his palace in 2 Samuel 9, verse 5, and restoring his credibility, the credibility of his family, and his inheritance. This act displayed David's commitment to reconciliation and conclusion throughout his government. His care for Saul's offspring repaired old wrongs and reintegrated an outcast, marginalized family back into society. Other key principles of restorative justice would be dialogue and communication. Restorative justice promotes open and honest communication between all parties. It aims to foster understanding, empathy, and accountability through dialogue, allowing for the expression of emotions and needs. This principle is seen in David's unification work. under his leadership, under his government. In 2 Samuel chapter 5, we see where David worked towards unifying the 12 tribes of Israel. These 12 tribes were previously divided and often engaged in conflicts, but David successfully established a central government in Jerusalem, making it the political and religious capital for all the tribes. This initiative aimed to bring together people from different backgrounds and religions under a common identity and helped bury the hatchet and to present an olive branch throughout the kingdom of Israel. Another example of this very thing is found in 2 Samuel chapter 6, when David brought the Ark of the Covenant to Jerusalem, emphasizing his desire to unite the people of Israel. The Ark of the Covenant, it was the symbol of religion and national identity for Israel. It was also the container of the Torah, their constitution. So as David established a central government for all the people and brought the ark in, he brought in the symbolism and literally the constitution for people, the higher law of God that directed and gave life and gave substance to the government that David set up. This was a powerful unifying force. Certainly, David's actions demonstrated his commitment to inclusivity by making the Ark and the Constitution, the Torah, accessible to all, regardless of their tribal affiliations. Other key principles of restorative justice is responsibility and accountability. Restorative justice is more than just holding offenders accountable for their actions and encouraging them to take responsibility for the harm that they've caused. It also accentuates the need for society to take responsibility for healing the hurts and making reparation for loss when it has occurred. In a civil society, each one must be accountable to another in stepping up, taking responsibility for righting wrongs and making people whole. We are all responsible to see to it that that happens. An example from this, in terms of King David's rule, is when he incorporated with the Philistines. You know, the Philistines, Israel's arch enemy, the very people that Goliath was associated with. Well, sacred literature infers that David pursued diplomatic and inclusive measures by fostering relationships with neighboring peoples, which included the Philistines. He formed alliances with these other nations through marriage, which helped to build bridges and promote peace between these different nations and people groups. This approach demonstrated a willingness to embrace diverse cultures and establish harmonious relations when the conditions were right. For us to not take the responsibility makes us the problem. Probably remember the statement that comes out of comics. Polo, he says, "I have seen the enemy and it is me." For those of us who will not be personally responsible for healing the wrongs of society, by making them right, we become the problem. And so we're talking about living in a constitutional republic, one that's governed by the higher law of God, as modeled through God himself. He was not the cause of mankind's sin, and yet he stepped up and took responsibility by sending Jesus to earth to live a sinless life, to die on a cross so that we could have his atonement, his healing put to our account, to our lives. God modeled that, and we must model that too. That is the way of a republic. May God bless the United States of America, and may He grant us success in restoring justice, both at home and abroad.